Make it fun to do the things that you want to do. Find a path that you will enjoy. And that might mean choosing a career where achieving your goals will be fun. It might mean, though, just pursuing a goal in a different way so that you'll find it a little bit more enjoyable. There's a lot of ways that we can think about making things fun, but that should be an objective, and focus less on efficiency and more on enjoyment. And weirdly, that actually makes you more effective and efficient.
Hey family, I love Dr. Katy Milkman. She's a Wharton professor and she's cracking the code of lasting behavior change. Now, co-founder of the Behavior Change for Good Institute, she's developed the concept of temptation bundling, and we're going to talk about that during this conversation. She also has a book, How to Change, that you absolutely must get. And I don't sell books, but I think it's really important for you to pull this one, because the book itself pulls insights from economics and psychology to help us tackle our most stubborn habits. Come on, enjoy this conversation I'm about to have with Dr. Katy Milkman. Dr. Katy, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you accommodated us. And I think you were just sharing that you actually podcast from a different place, but you've got us podcasting into your office today at the great university you represent. Yeah.
Yes, I am. I am sitting at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania in my office today while we're speaking. Had to be here for some meetings, graduation's coming up. So it's a bit of a crazy week, and thrilled to be able to do this in the midst.
It's a week of change.
Absolutely. It's a week of change and new beginnings, lots of fresh starts going on.
Well, let's start our conversation with you sharing what first drew you to studying human decision making.
Oh, I really do me search, which, is as opposed to research, right? It's such a pleasure to get to wake up in the morning and apply science to understanding better the decisions that trip me up and the people I love. And I really just couldn't believe that there was a science of studying these topics that I was so intrinsically interested in from a very young age. And as soon as I found it, I thought, yeah, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. It's just studying what I think about as a curiosity. And so that's what drew me to the field.
Does science exist in your mind as an art form, regardless of whether we are actively engaging principles and approaches that that lectured science teaches us, the science that you would teach from a classroom?
I think there's science everywhere, right? So anytime that you are trying to answer a question in the world, anytime you're trying to understand something, you can use principles from science, whether they've been taught to you in a classroom or whether you've intuited them or picked them up from people around you in order to try to figure out, what's the truth. So I think science is very broad. It doesn't just exist in classrooms and universities, but every toddler is constantly exploring and asking questions and hypothesis generating and hypothesis testing as they take in their surroundings. So I think science is just a part of everyone's lives.
And I ask you that question right up front because as we approach our conversation, I think it's important for us to evaluate how we actually do think about it. Science versus religion is one conversation many people have. Also, people have the question about whether or not it has to be stratified by hypotheses and some formulaic approach in order for us to legitimately call it science, more in the academian factor. There are two things that really make me wonder at this point, your thought on it. And that is, one, I started watching a series called Watson. Morris Chestnut stars in it, and I think it's on Netflix. And so I'm not selling for them. I'm just letting people know if they want to watch it, that's where I found it. And he has a group of doctors collected into a lab of sorts where they approach medicine and the science behind it, and they put a detective spin on it. We're detectives discovering. I think it's leaning toward, for the first two episodes I've seen, Dr. Katy, around the idea that we approach life that way, and there's so much more good and outcome that can happen when we take a scientific approach to it, which does, lean in toward how detectives work. And the other reason I ask you is because I'm a new grandma. So I've got two new grandbabies. One is a year old and one is 9 months old, 10 months old, actually. And I look at them and I see how every day, when you said you're searching for truths, you're asking questions and searching for truths, I see them doing that even without language every day. And so that's where my question came from. And I'm just curious now, how has any understanding of the challenges that you see in doing that shaped your own approach to life and choices as we talk about science?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I certainly think science, as I said, is in broad use. It's sort of when we are taking an approach to understanding things that is principled and when we're collecting data. I think there's something very special about high quality scientific evidence that's different than what a 10-month-old can collect about the world, right? And that can lead us to draw firm conclusions. And I try to do that in my research. But I
Yes, so
think
much of
having
what yes, so much of what they learn, doctor, does influence so much of their life, doesn't it? And they learn so much fast in that period, don't they?
Absolutely. But I think taking that broad view and recognizing that sort of anytime we're trying to learn or explore, there is a scientific approach we can take, that's very useful. But I do think it's also useful to distinguish between evidence that's really high quality and has been collected using the highest scientific standards, and that we use that evidence to inform our decisions as opposed to intuition or guesswork or, more haphazard gathering of data, which is also useful, but it's an earlier stage in the scientific process. So I just want to say that I'm a firm believer that science is everywhere in every exploration, but there's also really high quality evidence from high quality science that should guide our choices, and we should distinguish between that and just sort of detective work that we do with our friends.
And
So
TV
otherwise, we
fun,
may make mistakes.
between that TV fun, right?
That's right. Yeah. But and yet recognizing that science is everywhere, it's part of the magic. It's part of what drew me to this career.
I love that you said it's part of the magic. And, that probably is somewhere along the line appropriate to fit into the definition of science, how it create, how it brings so
And
much.
technology, when it is sort of like the magic of eras bygone that people imagined. Now we actually have solutions from science and thanks to technology that really emulate what once people imagined could only be accomplished through magic.
That concept of temptation bundling, and I think that's what pairing something enjoyable with a behavior that provides a delayed reward, right?
You've got it.
That kind of feels like Southern wisdom I grew up with. It's kind of like all that stuff that I learned back there wrapped inside of scientific evidence. Can you talk with us a little bit about a few of your favorite examples of temptation bundling? I know you talked once about, well, maybe more than once, but I'm familiar with listening to audiobooks only while in the gym.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great example. So, temptation bundling you already defined beautifully, but the purpose of it is to help motivate yourself to do something that you know is good for you, that you want to do, but that might otherwise feel like a chore and that you might procrastinate on perhaps indefinitely, right? Some of us really want to get in shape, and yet when the choice comes between at the end of a long day sitting down and binge watching maybe Watson on Netflix, as you were mentioning, and heading to the gym or heading for a run in the neighborhood, often the temptations win out. And the idea of temptation bundling is actually, what if you made the temptation part of the activity that you know is good for you? What if that were actually a draw as opposed to in competition with the activity that feels a little bit like a chore, but that's important to you in the long run? So one of my favorite temptation bundles is related to exercising. I tend to actually now I only let myself binge watch my favorite TV shows while I'm on an elliptical. I used to do it with audiobooks, but I've been able to move on. I'm very late to the game, but I'm watching Ted Lasso and enjoying it immensely on my elliptical. And I don't get to watch Ted Lasso unless I'm on the elliptical. And that means that at the end of a long day, instead of sort of dreading it and thinking, oh, there's 10 other things I'd rather do, all I want to do is find out what happens next to my favorite characters. But there are lots of actual other examples that we can use to think about temptation bundling. It's not just about exercise, though that's where we've studied it empirically and proven it is beneficial. You can also think about temptation bundling in contexts like trying to get household chores done, right? You only get to listen to your favorite podcast while you are doing those household chores, or maybe cooking a fresh meal for yourself and your family. Relatedly, you could think of, a favorite bottle of wine that's set aside for when you are preparing those kinds of meals that are meaningful, that are filled with health benefits. You can also think about temptation bundling at work. So for a while, I had a rule that I was only allowed to get a pedicure if I was catching up on some overdue manuscript reading that I had to do. For other people, it might be responding to some emails that have been sitting for too long. But that can be something that makes it a little bit more enjoyable to get caught up on something you're behind on. Another example would be a favorite restaurant you only let yourself visit when spending time with, say, a difficult mentee from work, or things along these lines. If there's a temptation you look forward to, can you link it to an activity that might otherwise be put off, that you might not otherwise enjoy, and change the nature of that chore into something that feels tempting, and so you'll get it done and it won't be painful.
Now, this is a little bit different than the carrot and the stick. It
A little bit.
fits into that same global aspect of making sure we bring positive experiences to things we may have looked at as negative. In temptation bundling, as you exampled and explained it to me, it seems that it also allows you to change the perspective you have of the thing that you laid a negative around as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite findings from the research on how we get things done is research by Ayelet Fishbach of the University of Chicago, showing when we make it more fun to pursue our goals, we are dramatically more likely to persist. And that many people don't intuit this. They think, I should choose the most efficient and painful path to, say, getting in shape, right? The maximally punishing stairmaster, or the toughest calculus workbook I can find if I want to master this subject. And so that might be efficient to take that tough straight path, but actually we tend to be better off if we are instead encouraged to find a way to make it more fun to get to our end goal. So maybe it's doing calculus with a friend and an easier book that's a little bit more fun. Maybe it's going to Zumba classes instead of getting on the maximally punishing stairmaster, or temptation bundling. But whatever it is that you can do to pursue your goal in a more enjoyable way tends to lead to higher efficacy. And the main reason is that you're less likely to quit. And most goals require persistence. If we don't enjoy the experience of pursuing the goal, we might make more progress per unit effort put in, but we're going to quit putting in effort and not get all the way to the finish line.
I think a lot of people are relating to what you're saying right now across the globe, because so many people are looking at their future today differently than they looked at their future 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. 5 years ago, though, people really were starting to have that experience, because 5 years ago, the whole world experienced COVID to some degree. And so people thought about it differently. And then we came out of COVID, and now we have other shifts and other things that are going on. One of the things that I've long believed, Dr. Katy, is that our greatest challenges do reveal our greatest strengths. And we saw that in how we were able to bring medicines forward during COVID, whether or not people wanted to take the medicine. We have to admit that it was a fast and it was a fantastic outcome, that for those who did want it, a medicine was brought forward in so quick a time that could scale so broadly. And so when we think about challenges versus, and revealing strengths, I look at your years of research and I think, wow, what behavioral barriers to change have proven most fascinating for you to study? And why would you study that? Because there are some changes that people have to make that aren't simply choices around, oh, I'd like to do this, or, I've committed to do this. There's some that I must do this, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are there's a great number of barriers that are within us. There is also, of course, external barriers, which we should acknowledge, right? If you don't have the financial resources to make a change, if you don't have the good health to make a change, those things can really be a major, major obstacle. But what I study is, even if everything is aligned, right? You have great health, great finances, all of everything situationally is structured to support success. We still have barriers internally to change because, for instance, we're present biased. We care more about instant gratification than long term rewards. And this leads us to procrastinate on making changes. We are forgetful, right? If it's not top of mind, our priorities often slip not just to the back burner, but off the burner entirely. And so forgetting can be a major barrier to change. We're creatures of habit. And the fact that we fall back on routines can be a barrier to change. So there are many, many different challenges. Confidence can be a challenge. Having social support and sort of believing you can do this. These are all in that list. And actually, the way I structure the book I wrote, How to Change, about the science of achieving your goals, is by sort of articulating each of the barriers that can get in our way, and then talking about what's the science that's best matched for each barrier, because there are different solutions. The one we've talked about already, temptation bundling and making it fun, those are actually really well suited to dealing with the challenge of procrastination, or of it not being instantly gratifying, and that we're present biased. But maybe the most interesting, which is what you asked me of all of these for me to have studied, was how do we just motivate ourselves to begin when we have a goal and we know we want to work towards it, but often we'll say, oh, next week, or sometime in the future I'll get to that goal, but not right now. So how do we make ourselves decide, no, right now is the time? How do we get started? That's something that I've found really fascinating and studied enough to a fair degree. The work that I did on this actually came from a visit I made, of all places, to Google's headquarters about 15 years ago. It doesn't seem like the place you'd be inspired to necessarily study how to start behavior change. But I was meeting with a group of their HR leaders and talking to them about how they could motivate their employees to be more focused on things like taking up educational programming that they were offering for free, and wellness opportunities. And I was sharing a bunch of our research. I talked about temptation bundling, and I got this fantastic question from one of their vice presidents. And he said, okay, Katy, I'm completely convinced that we should be using these tools of behavioral science to nudge people towards healthier decisions that are better for their careers and so on. But is there some ideal time when we should motivate change? Are there moments when people are more open to making a meaningful change in their life, tackling a new goal, than others? And I thought it was such a fantastic and fascinating question that it actually drove my research agenda for the next several years. In collaboration with a student named Heng Chen Dai and Jason Reese also, we started looking into this question, trying to figure out when are the moments that people are more motivated to pursue their goals. And what we started with was the intuition that I'm sure you'll share, and just the recognition that one moment when there's a massive uptick in goal pursuit is New Year's, right? We all know that, right? You didn't need a scientist on this show to tell you that. Everybody can look around and say, yeah, that's a weird moment when everybody's suddenly fixated on what are my goals for the year ahead. And we thought, what does that teach us about the human condition and goal pursuit more generally than just that insight that, okay, yeah, New Year's, new you. And we started digging into research that had been done on something called autobiographical memory, which is the way that you tell your life story. And what we learned is that people don't think about time linearly, or about their lives as a linear story, but we think about our lives like we're characters in a book that has chapters. And those chapter breaks are very meaningful moments when we feel that we have a new beginning or a fresh start. And of course, New Year's is a famous one that we all talk about. It's socially constructed, but we all say, oh, New Year's, that's a chapter break. It's a new year, new me. But there are other moments too that feel like chapter breaks and give us the same sense that we have a disconnect from who we are right now and who we were in that last chapter. And that disconnect turns out to be very motivating. It makes us feel like, okay, yeah, last year I didn't get in shape. Last year I didn't achieve my financial goals. Last year I didn't achieve my goals at work to the degree I hope, but that was the old me, and this is going to be the new me, and I can do better now. So those disconnects are motivating, and they come about fairly regularly. So you can just probably intuit a lot of the natural breaks in life that give you that sense of a chapter closing and a new one opening, right? Everything from moving to a new home or a new job to getting a promotion, becoming a grandmother in your case recently, right? That's a big fresh start moment. But actually, there's even little ones that come with no change in your life that are even, to me, somewhat more interesting because there's nothing different except a calendar shift. So moments like a birthday, moments like Mondays, moments like the start of a new season. These are all moments that can have the same fresh start benefit as the new year. And we've shown in study after study that at these kinds of moments, if people notice them, and even if they aren't drawn to their attention, people do it naturally at New Year's, at the start of a new week, at birthdays. People set more goals about everything from their health to their education, to their finances, even to environmental protection. And we can nudge people, meaning we can remind them or highlight these dates and use that as a way to convince them this is the perfect time to begin pursuing a goal. So that's one of my favorite things that I've studied. It was kind of a long answer to your question. What's my favorite barrier? But
I
I think
love
this
it.
barrier of lack of momentum is probably my favorite that I've studied. Lack
I,
of beginning.
I'm sitting here loving it so much. I'm holding myself still so that I don't make all kind of crazy facial expressions as you're talking. But one of them that I was about to make was ooh 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 ooh. And Dr. Katie, that ooh 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 is I'm sitting here. You can't see it, but I'm facing the outside of one of my homes, and I have nothing at any of the windows except these beautiful yellow roses. And they have a story behind them that I can share with you at a different time. Here's the thing. My husband had them planted so that they would show up all year long for me. But this time of year is when my favorite, I have yellow roses all year, but this time of year is when my favorite ones show up. And they are associated with an activity in my life. And I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, she's really talking right into my space now as you're saying that. I appreciate so much how you described we don't think about our lives in a linear way all the time. And I know that I was wondering as you were talking about that, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Which comes first, the opinion or the behavior? Let me go deeper where to make sure I'm asking it how I intended. Let's say I really don't like to get up and have the drill sergeant drill me at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I'm in the military. Does the does, does the opinion need to change before the behavior changes that actually gets me? Or you see where I'm going with
I
it? And we
do.
could
I do.
find
Yeah.
it
So I
anywhere.
should say this is not something I personally have studied, but there is a literature in that comes out of clinical psychology that focuses actually on clinical challenges, things like addiction. How do we break an addiction, for instance? That sort of has laid out what are the stages of change. And that model would say that before we can take action and change a behavior, we have to recognize that there is a problem and we have to have an intention to fix it. And there's sort of a stage model where eventually we get to the change, but it begins with a recognition. It doesn't normally precede realization or motivation. So the motivation needs to be there to change. That's the general presumption. Most of my work starts actually after that moment when I have a realization I want to change. I'm motivated to do it, but I can't figure out how to bring myself to execute, which is the case for many of us with many of our goals, right? We know to eat healthier. We know that we have to, focus on our studies in order to achieve in school. We know that our finances take attention and budgets, but we may falter on the execution rather than the information, the motivation, the setting of the goals. And so that's really where my work tends to come in. But absolutely, realization is an important stage. Before you've set the goal, you're not going to make progress on it for most of us.
Thank you so much for that, because a lot
Yeah.
of people have a lot of different aspects of that going on for them that has to be addressed before anything else is going to matter for them. I know from my own experience, I have found that timing and time in are really important when introducing major changes. And your research shows people are more motivated to take action during a fresh start moment, something like when they move to a new home or birth a baby. How can business leaders, you talked about going to Google and speaking with the HR leads, how can business leaders use this type of insight when planning organizational changes? How might they create those fresh start feelings for their teams, even when the calendar doesn't naturally provide them? And I'm asking that because lots of companies are pivoting. Lots, I know that we all watched IBM do it years ago and do it quite successfully, but companies of all sizes, all scales are looking at pivoting. AI is being introduced in ways that are changing how people work and what they work on. And I could go on, but I'd love you to talk about that. How can we do that? Many of our family are leading teams in companies, and many own their own companies, as well as those who aspire, entrepreneurially. So,
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's a number of different ways that I think about fresh starts interacting with business goals. So, one is the way I've already said, which is not exactly an answer to your question, but that is that leaders of companies, if they want to motivate change in employees specifically, can look to these moments, whether it's a Monday, the start of a new month, the celebration of a new year, as points in time when it may be more beneficial to put opportunities in front of employees for self-improvement. And that can be everything from, executive coaching might be something you want to offer people in at a fresh start moment, to just sitting down with their manager to set new goals, that they may be more open to pursuing those and beginning to pursue those and more likely to take action at those moments. But then if you don't see, and they do arise pretty regularly, so conveniently they are often on the calendar, but if you want to create one, we've done some research that suggests it can be quite hard to create them artificially. So if you tell somebody, for instance, oh, it's the 100th day of the year, it's a perfect moment for a fresh start, or it's Valentine's Day, it's the perfect moment for a fresh start, they don't buy it, and it doesn't change their behavior because it doesn't align with a moment that feels like a meaningful shift point for them. On the other hand, there are things leaders have opportunities to adjust that do create real fresh starts. So I mentioned earlier that my work on Fresh Starts was with an amazing student, Heng Chen Dai, who's now a professor at UCLA. In her dissertation research, she looked at the idea that a reset of tracking can be a fresh start, meaning, if I track your sales performance, say on a monthly basis, then with each month, when we sort of wipe the slate clean and say, okay, it's a new month starting over, we're going to work towards your personal best this month, that feels like a fresh start. By the way, it's very helpful for people who are struggling to have those resets, but actually can be harmful to people who've been succeeding, because you don't want to disconnect when you're on a roll. So it's important to note that fresh starts aren't always on the menu for every employee or every organization, but you can think about those kinds of resets in tracking. Like we're gonna define today as the first moment when we start tracking for new employee, new metrics to see how we're doing as a company, or how we're doing as a team, or how you are doing as an individual, and that creates a fresh start. The other thing I would say is that a corporate retreat, or some other disruption to business as usual that you insert as a leader. We're going to spend today on reflection, or we're going to spend today together doing some unusual activity. That is a disruption to the usual cycle, and you can think of it as a chapter break. So you can insert chapter breaks as a leader through those kinds of activities. Theoretically, I have not run experiments to test that specifically as a tool for creating a fresh start, but it matches the theory and what we've seen in other contexts. So those would be my three answers. Take the natural fresh starts, encourage people to self-improve at those moments, think about resets, and think about whether you as a leader have the opportunity to structure or create moments that feel like fresh starts through retreats or other activities that change and break the flow of normalcy in your organization.
And when we think about doing this on the individual level, uh, respecting what is legal and what is culturally acceptable in your company, how you treat individuals. We have performance metrics in our company, and we have budgets set against those performance metrics. So, bottom line is, I'm saying there's some things in the company that have to be met. We have a leader who sought permission to move a person's performance, skewer it, not giving them more time, but starting them at the end of February and allowing them to finish deeper, while the rest of her team were quite happy with the calendar year for their metrics. And we asked her why. And she said, I looked at her behavior and I learned that around the time we schedule our finish on a calendar year is the time she lost a young child. And she comes in with a bang after she's had that grief revisit and actually performs at the top of the team. But by how we were doing it, it was even more depressing and more, debilitating to her performance. Yeah, challenging. And so I like what you're saying, and you're making me think we may want to look that across, how do we now, especially with AI helping us to do so much of the task work, how we can allow people to have schedules that may not necessarily fit a calendar. And I think that's a benefit that that many companies can now give to employees in very different ways. Taking now, I've enjoyed your book. I think they need to enjoy your book in order to be able to take that deeper. And I hope our family will read your book so that it can help them forward. You have a chapter in your book that explores how our social environments powerfully shape the behavior that we approach, and that may not be the best example of a social environment. Maybe we often want to run to where our economics are, where is our family culture, that kind of thing, and how is it treated in the larger scale. I do think this intuitively already seems true on the surface, but what are you finding most surprising about social influence? Is that a
Oh.
fair question for you?
Yeah, what's most surprising? I mean, I think just how big the effects can be is one of the things that sometimes surprises people, and where we even find it. So there's one really interesting study that was done at the US Air Force Academy, just looking at the group of cadets you were randomly assigned to live with in your first year, and showing that if you were randomly assigned essentially a social group to live with, who you may or may not even connect with, right? You Not all of my college roommates have were people
I
who
thought about that. I
right.
thought about you did that freshman year in college
Yeah,
when
not everybody is
back in the day when
some of them
everybody
you
was.
sort of say hello to and you move on. But that randomly assigned cohort turns out to have a large impact on your performance in school. So it affects your grades. If you have more um, let's say academically oriented roommates, that shifts how you behave. And uh, we're also influenced just by having other people's behavior described. We don't literally have to see it and live with them in order to have our behavior shifted. When I learn that, for instance, my neighbors are more energy efficient than I am, that they're more successfully cutting back and contributing to a more sustainable future, that creates an impetus for me to cut back my energy usage. So we're very shaped by what we see, what we're told about how other people behave. And there's sort of two key reasons. One is there's information. So I might not believe it's even possible to say cut my energy use or study on Thursday nights until I see someone else doing it. Now I realize, oh, this is feasible. Someone like me has pulled this off. Someone with a home like mine or somebody with a lifestyle like mine has managed to achieve this. So that increases my belief that this is possible. but it also just creates a sense of this is the appropriate thing to do, and I don't want to stick out like a sore thumbs, or I want to fit in with others. You can also gain social support from others. We did an experiment. This was led by UC Berkeley's Rachel Gershon, showing that if we were trying to get people to form gym habits, and everybody who signed up for this project wanted to, they all wanted to exercise more. We were thinking, is it better to just pay them directly to come to the gym? That's what economic theory would say. Like, if you're going to try to use money to incentivize gym attendance, just pay directly for gym attendance. That's the best way to do it. But we thought it may be that social support could play a really crucial role here. So everyone in our experiment signed up with a buddy who they like to work out with. And then we randomly assigned some of them to get paid $1 every time they came to the gym. That's the sort of standard economic model. And another group, they only earned that dollar for coming to the gym if they showed up with their friend. Now, this makes it much harder to get your dollar. And by the way, if you were earning $1 for going to the gym, you could always bring your friend with you, right? We weren't stopping you. But interestingly, people didn't seem to appreciate how beneficial it was under those circumstances. What we found is that when paid only for coming with a friend, people exercised about 35% more. They came to the gym more often, and they felt accountable to this other person. They didn't want to let them down, and they enjoyed their workouts more than when it was with someone else. Coming back, by the way, to temptation bundling. So making something social is a way to make it more fun. It can be a form of temptation bundle. So I think this is one interesting example of social support that goes beyond just learning from the people around me what's possible or feeling social pressure. It's also that social support can create accountability and joy, and that can propel us forward in ways we don't appreciate fully and be more powerful than even, monetary rewards, which is what we normally think of as the lever we want to pull to motivate people.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Um, you know, on a more personal level, for members of our family who want to harness social influence for positive changes in their own lives, what's a simple strategy they may take, given all you've already said, that allows them to implement this week a way to surround themselves with the right influences or create a mini culture that supports their personal goals?
Oh, wow. That's a hard question.
Well, you're at Wharton, so you can answer hard
I'll
questions.
try. I'll do my best. I mean, I think thinking about are there people in your life right now who are sources of joy, who you enjoy being with, and who have shared goals with you that where you aren't already yoking those goals, meaning putting them together, trying to team up, trying to hold each other accountable? Is there someone else? If you think of what are your top level goals, whether it's related to your health, your finances, your social life, your professional life, whatever those goals, do you know someone who you respect, who you care about, who you enjoy, who has a similar goal? Because if you do, and you're not already working together to support each other, that's an opportunity lost. So try to find someone who has a shared goal, and simple things like just checking in with them to see how they're doing, and if they have any advice they could offer can be helpful. It turns out we've done some research showing we can nudge people to deliberately learn strategies working for other people and see their performance improve when they're working on similar goals, because we don't already naturally have the realization I should tap into that wisdom that's in my social network. We can help people by just reminding them to tap into it. But the other thing is, if you can ask that person to check in with you and hold you accountable, and also offer, if they ever have a need for advice, that you're there. Because another thing our research has shown is that when people are serving as mentors to others, when we give other people guidance and advice on a shared goal, it actually improves our own performance. So not only do you want to extract insights and social support from these amazing people in your life, but actually if you ask them to please extract insights from you, that helps you too, which is pretty wonderful, because giving not only benefits the other person, benefits you, and by the way, makes you happier, it makes them happier. So there's a whole lot of win-wins that are just waiting to be grabbed if you sort of think about how can you tap into those people in your life with shared goals, and how can you be on a journey together.
So, a lot of people aren't having personal relationships where they may tap in, or if they're looking to create a change that is personal to them, and they don't want the many friends they have to be a part of that. And they are, and that's there. And there are people, Dr. Katie, who have their larger social circles as a digital community. It still works.
Um, there are many different ways to get social support. So, if you think about what is the role that a therapist or a coach plays, to some extent, they're providing that social support and accountability. So it doesn't have to be that you have someone already in your network. You can hire someone who can provide this kind of support. And I agree with you that to the extent you don't have people who are in close proximity to you, there are many goals that people can seek support for through online networks. Now, in general, accountability and social pressure work better in closer proximity. So face to face is better than Zoom, and Zoom is better than phone, and phone is better than text, and text is probably better than email. So you do want more proximity when possible because you feel more accountability to someone you're co-located with. That is, all of the research shows that social pressure and accountability are amped up by that proximity. But that doesn't mean that there aren't benefits even when there's distance between you and someone else who's providing support.
So I believe, and correct me if I'm in error to your perspective, that that opinions, that habits are the outcomes or examples, windows to opinions. What are some of the mistakes people need to watch out for when they are attempting to change a habit, or what might be a better approach for them based on your research to mitigate the risk of mistakes along, because people are making some big changes right now, even
Yeah.
though they may feel like small steps, they have big impacts in people's lives today. And so I think it's important for us to address that, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. So habits are one way that we can change behavior, right? There's a bit of a holy grail perception that everything can be a habit. That's probably not true, right? Not every behavior you want to change is going to be something you can sort of make automatic in the way that it's automatic to shampoo your hair in the in the shower or put a coffee pot on in the morning, or I think you just told me you were a tea drinker, a pot of tea, right? So there are many things that we do really automatically without thinking carefully about them. Those are habits. And a lot of the goals we have honestly can't be supported by that automaticity. However, the more we offload the decision and make it part of our routine in our life and have it come naturally, the easier it is. And so, and a lot of these repeated goals are things we might want to think about. Okay, what is the science that will allow me to either break bad habits or deliberately build good ones? And the key to that habit building is actually not terribly surprising in some ways. The most basic building blocks, which have been written about in many books at this point, including mine, are that repetition is critical, right? So I think of it as very similar. If you've ever learned a musical instrument or a new skill, there's a lot of practice that goes into, right? My son is learning piano. He needs to practice daily when he's learning a new piece. And habits form in a similar way through deliberate repetition. You're sort of practicing doing the thing over and over until it starts to feel natural and like you're not having to think about it. Ideally, the repetition is in a tight time frame, meaning, if you're trying to form a gym habit and you repeat going to the gym once a month, well, it's not going to sort of start to feel habitual. But if you repeat it daily, that's probably going to start to feel habitual faster and better. So frequent repetition, reward following the activity or as part of the activity, meaning, and this is really related to what we're talking about making it fun. You don't want to dread it. Is there some way to celebrate or associate positive experiences with it doesn't have to mean literally, oh, I get a cash reward after I go to the gym or after I brush my teeth. But is there do you celebrate in some way? Do you give yourself some treat? Is the experience itself enjoyable because you temptation bundled or you went with a friend or it was a Zumba class and you loved it? Whatever the way is, the experience should involve reward so that you will repeat. And by the way, this is how bad habits are formed too. If you think about things like nail biting, that's a similar process where people do it normally to relieve stress. Say, right, I'm anxious about something. I bite a nail. I feel a little bit of relief because now I'm focused on something besides what was wandering through my mind. And then this happens again. I repeat it enough and suddenly it's a habit. Now I don't even need it for stress relief. It's not taking my mind off of anything, but I can't break this habit because I've built it. But we can do it
It's just that
deliberately for
comfort
good
blanket.
things.
It becomes that comfort blanket.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. So bad habits are formed the same way as good habits. But what we want to do for good habits is we want to be more intentional about this. So, one other finding in habits that I find really interesting, and that is from a project I did several years ago with Harvard's John Bashirs, is a project where we looked at whether it was better to form habits or to help people form habits if we encourage them to use or do the thing that they were trying to make habitual at the same time of day consistently or in a more variable manner. So we looked at this with gym attendance. We either rewarded people for exercise only if they went in a narrow window. So they chose the ideal time for them. Say, I'm a 7 to 9 a.m. gym rat. And then some people, they got a reminder, but then they only could be rewarded if they went during that narrow window. And other people got a reminder, but they could be rewarded whether they went during that window or not. We did this for a month and then the rewards were removed. And what we wanted to see was which group had created a more stable habit, actually, after holding constant how frequently they went. So we have two groups of people in the end who basically went to the gym at the same frequency, but one group, half of their workouts were at, let's say, their magic interval, and the rest were all over the place. And the other group, 90% almost, were at the same time. And our expectation was the people where 90% were at the same time, they're going to have formed a more stable habit because they were so consistent in the execution that it will stick more. And we were wrong. It was actually the group that had formed a more flexible habit that had more stability. And so it was very puzzling to us initially because we thought, no, don't you want to form a habit around a consistent schedule? What we found when we dug into the data was that flexibility is actually really key to success. Whether it's, going to the gym, meditating, getting your taxes paid on, filing, whatever it is, paying your bills, you need to figure out a way to get it done no matter what. And when we form really rigid habits, I only work out between 7 and 9 a.m. and I've never worked out at any other time. And so if I hit traffic on the way to the gym or on the way to work, I'm hosed. I can't do it. Those people, they're too rigid. They've built inflexible habits. Whereas if people have practiced, yeah, I have my ideal time, but if I miss my 8:30 a.m. workout, I found a way, because I've tried it before, to get to the gym at noon. I can also get there at 5 and I can make that work. Then they're less brittle. These habits, they can actually adjust when there's a surprise, like a traffic jam, and they can't hit the gym at the regular time, and they can get there some other way. And so that's what we found when we dug into our data about what was going on. Essentially, by trying to form a habit that's too rigid, it's a 9 a.m. or bust habit. We created habits that weren't flexible to real lives, because our real lives throw us curveballs all the time, and we have to be prepared to have a plan B and be good at falling back to that plan B when we get the curveball.
The rigidity as an obstacle to change is not something I considered before being introduced to your work, and listening to you now reaffirms that it is one. I thought about procrastination as being, a negative, and that people don't often know they're procrastinators when they are, or they don't accept the things that are actually harmed by procrastination if everything else is fluid, especially when it comes to change. And so, what do you think could be an effective approach for, and all of us, I think, have experienced procrastination to some degree. Uh, Now things happen so much quicker. History, for years, doctor, I've said history, happens so much quicker today than it did then. Um, Not meaning necessarily that people are changing so much, but what people do and how they do it is changing so much that it's impacting socio-political, economic things that I refer to as historic changes. Rambling back to the beginning of what I'm asking you, it's about procrastination. On the one hand, you talked about rigidity. On the other hand, there is procrastination, right? There is that. And how do we help people to see how that can be as damaging as rigidity, and how do they take a different approach to help them with procrastination, given we're talking to adults?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Procrastination is all around us. We talked a little bit about one solution, which is make it more enjoyable and instantly gratifying, and then we'll procrastinate less. So that's you can call that the carrot side of carrots and sticks. There's also a stick side to procrastination that can be very useful and that we haven't talked about yet. And economists like to call the stick side a commitment device. So we're all familiar with having a parent or a teacher who tries to help us avoid procrastinating by, say, setting deadlines and having penalties if we don't achieve, turn in an assignment by this deadline or achieve a goal by this deadline or else. What's funny about a commitment device is it is imposing those kinds of constraints not on a child or an employee, but on yourself. I'll give you another example. This isn't exactly about procrastination, but it's also an example of a type of penalty that's related to impulsivity. We're used to, say, the state or city you live in giving you a traffic ticket if you speed. You might be tempted to speed, but you'd never think of giving yourself a ticket for speeding. But that's kind of the idea of a commitment device is you recognize in yourself you might be tempted to procrastinate or not engage in the behaviors your ideal self would, and you can set up a system that penalizes yourself or your future self for making those mistakes. So let me give you some examples to make this a little more concrete, but research shows this is very effective. One of my favorites is a smoking cessation program designed by some researchers, including Northwestern University's Dean Carlin. They wanted to help smokers quit. They randomly assigned smokers to one of two programs. Program 1, standard smoking cessation package. Program 2, standard smoking cessation package plus an opportunity to put your own money into an account and know that you will lose that money, all of it, in 6 months' time if you fail a urine test for nicotine or cotinine, meaning you can't prove that you're no longer smoking. Now, first of all, not everyone wants to put money on the line for this, right? But just having the opportunity to do so is what they're testing. What's the impact of that on smoking cessation? What they find is that people who are given the chance to put money on the line, they'll lose if they quit, finding themselves for failing. They quit at a 30% higher rate than people who have standard smoking cessation tools. So if someone was tempted to procrastinate and I'll quit smoking next year, not this year, this kills that temptation because now there's a fine associated with failing to follow through on your best intentions on time, on deadline. We can create commitment devices for ourselves of a similar kind. There are a number of websites that will let you go to the website, put money on the line that you will have to forfeit if you fail to achieve your goal by a certain deadline. You can name a referee. It can be in some cases a device, right? Oh, if I don't take this many steps by this time, or if I, weigh in and my digital scale doesn't report X. It can be a friend, it can be your church pastor saying you've been procrastinating on coming to services. It can be anyone in your life who can hold you accountable. But then you can, forfeit that money and you can just decide how much. You can send it to a charity of your choice. I have no affiliation with any of the websites that do this. By the way, you can do it on the side without a website involved. But there are websites like Stick, STICKK.com, and BeMinder that will do this for you. And research shows that using these kinds of commitment devices is a very effective way to reduce procrastination because we've created a stick so that what feels good in the moment is more costly overall, and therefore net, the balance is, okay, I'll do the thing that's good for me in the long run because now I've increased the cost or the pain of not following through.
That's good stuff. Um, you provoked two more questions that may seem disconnected, but they are, at least in my mind, connected. And one is, what simple practices we can adopt, whether parent, student, employee, entrepreneur, we've talked about it all, to create spaces where people can feel comfortable sharing doubts versus having them hide behind masks of confidence. We see a lot, we call it fakery, right? Today, and a lot of fake stuff on the internet. But how do we create spaces where people can truly, not, I'm not simply talking about be themselves or bring them full selves,
Yeah.
simply feel comfortable sharing doubts.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. You're making me think of the amazing research by Harvard's Amy Edmondson on psychological safety, which is the concept that we know we won't be rebuked or punished if we share imperfections or errors or acknowledge mistakes. And what Amy's research on psychological safety shows is that teams where leaders make sure that everyone around understands that they're there to support their learning and their growth, and that um, while there's a high standard, if there are missteps, they will be greeted not with harsh penalties, but rather with a solution focus. We'll work together to work it out. Those teams have higher performance. This is something that's true at in hospital teams, and that was where her original work was focused. But there's also been research at tech companies, in many other settings, showing that in general we want to create psychologically safe spaces, and those are spaces where people are going to be more comfortable sharing doubts, recognizing that they are imperfect, as opposed to thinking they always have to put on a facade. And so I would think about that. It's modeling that it's okay. It's sharing your own doubts about yourself. It's saying, I'm not perfect as your leader. And it's the way you treat other people who make mistakes in a visible way so that they aren't rebuked and others know they wouldn't be rebuked, that creates that kind of culture of psychological safety and of collaboration. We're in this together as opposed to adversarial approaches to leadership.
One thing, Dr. Katie, I witnessed as a leader and owner of a company is that when we became verbal and we created it as a tenet of how we operate, the feet we stand on in my company, and feet is freedom to innovate, excellence in delivery. Everyone and everything matters, so we invest the time to understand. We'd been that company from my mind for many years when we actually created tenant around that, and people could express themselves and see the merit and reward, not just from compensation but from enjoyment of their work. We saw it go up. So I do believe you are correct in creating that and making sure that you're articulating it in a way that people understand it's vital, not just okay, and that gives us as team members a consideration for those who are actually living that. Because freedom to innovate does require you to allow people to express doubt or to create error in the process, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And there's also a large research literature on the idea of creating a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset, which I think is related. So, growth mindset means that I recognize that in almost all aspects of performance and life, I am not born with innate abilities that are fixed, but rather I can learn and grow. On the opposite end of the spectrum from a growth mindset, though, we can have a fixed mindset, which is to say, I am born with innate abilities and that's my limit and that's where I am and where I'll always be. When we adopt a growth mindset, it allows us to see missteps and failures um, and setbacks very differently, because instead of seeing them as diagnostic of our capacity and saying, oh, this didn't go well, this didn't work out, therefore I must be incapable, incompetent, only have this level I can achieve. We see them with a growth mindset and we say, What can I learn from that so I can do better next time? And it doesn't demoralize us. It instead propels us forward with greater success. So there's really wonderful research by Carol Dweck and others on the importance of growth mindset, and showing in experiments that when we teach people that almost every aspect of ourselves, including our IQ, is not fixed, but actually can grow, then they achieve at higher levels.
You make me think, and recently I've seen a lot of people repeating it, so it must be out there somewhere in the literature or the conversations people are listening to. Nelson Mandela, and I won't say it's a quote because I don't remember specifically if it's a quote. I've been hearing them say, they learn so much and they appreciate so much, and they are more prepared to express doubt or to, take on risk because of what he said, which I remember it being to this effect: I never lose, I either win or learn.
That's
And
an amazing growth mindset quote. I love that.
yeah, yeah, we got to check to see if that's exactly what he
Hopefully,
said.
even when he wins, he learns. But
Yeah.
I should say
Yes,
when he won, he learned. But yes,
yes,
yes.
yes,
But
yes.
but learning through failure is one of the best things we can do.
Yes, yes, yes. So before we go to 4 for 4, let me ask you this. Now, people who know me know that I believe confidence must never be confused with arrogance. Your book explores how self doubt impacts behavior change. What strategies, Dr. Katie, help professionals overcome confidence barriers when they're facing these new challenges? And if you don't mind, can you lean in a little bit on women and minorities in business? Because there are a lot of questions today about whether the DE and I-ness of things need to continue to achieve the goals we originally had them set up to achieve. Wow, I hope I didn't land too much on you.
No, it's a great question. And in my book where I write about this, I talk about the importance of a growth mindset, and which we've just talked about, and I talk about the power of being put in positions where you can mentor and coach others, which helps you grow. But I actually want to tell you about some research that isn't in my book that I've done more recently that I think speaks to this moment. I also want to say that confidence is a particular barrier and challenge for women and underrepresented minorities because the stereotypes of those groups, particularly in business, are not historically flattering, right? So that creates for people who are women or minorities, they may have expectations that are too low for what they can achieve because of the stereotypes they have.
Along with the fear of failure for um, one opportunity
That's right.
outcome.
That's right. Um, we did some research that looked at whether or not we could harness the power of reactance to help women build confidence and compete more in settings where they would often not compete due to a lack of confidence. So let me unpack that a little bit more. Reactance is the term we use when people react in anger against feeling constrained or held back. And it's actually a very powerful motivator. If you think about some of the protests we saw actually during COVID, during lockdowns, and how upset people were about things like mask mandates, that's reactance. Anytime I feel controlled, I may react really negatively to that and actually do just the opposite of what someone who's trying to influence me wants me to do. Now, I will say, in that case, I didn't feel reactance. I was very grateful to public health authorities for trying to help us all survive a pandemic. But I certainly understood why we saw what we did, because that's a classic example of you constrain me. I don't believe in the greater good you're working towards. I maybe don't believe in your motivations, or I don't think it'll work. And therefore, we're going to predict reactance. So we wanted to harness that same, I don't like feeling controlled idea to help women and minorities and their confidence gaps not hold them back so much. We ran an experiment in partnership with a large organization called Above Board that helps women and minorities in particular, though it's open to anyone, find opportunities for leadership roles. So think C-suite positions or board memberships. You have to pre-apply to be on their platform, but the idea is to try to flatten or sort of replace the old boys network for some of these job searches. Despite having this platform that was built to to propel these groups to higher levels of organizational leadership, and had incredibly well qualified members, right? These are people who've already accomplished so much in their careers that they qualified to be on the site seeing these opportunities. Women were applying less than men for the same roles with the same qualification levels. And we've seen this over and over again, and confidence is one of the major barriers to that. What we did was we tried a couple different banner ads to see if we could change this. Well, actually, one banner ad in particular, and then we had a control version. The banner ad tried to trigger reactance. It said, research by economists at Stanford University has shown that women are less likely to compete for opportunities than equally qualified men. And this hurts women. Don't let this happen to you. Apply for every job you feel qualified for. Lean in. Basically, don't follow the stereotype. Don't let the men get the upper hand. We said, don't let them get the upper hand. And then we had another version of the ad just as a control that basically also encouraged people to lean in and apply, but didn't use gender or didn't use identity. Just said more frequent people who use the site more and who apply more do better. So apply more. Don't let yourself be held back. So both people are really getting encouragement, but one of them is getting it in this packaging that says, don't fall victim to stereotypes. Stand up against them, react against them, show that you can defy them. And what we found is about a 20% increase in applications for these roles on the day when people were exposed to that message. And we did a series of follow-up studies to sort of unpack it. What it highlights to me is actually, I think it's important for us to communicate, and I know this is something you are committed to doing, but all of us to communicate more regularly with women and underrepresented groups about how harmful it can be to allow this stereotype to define you and to challenge them to react against, make them angry. Let's get angry. Let's lean in and encourage people to defy that harmful stereotype, and that can be beneficial. So educating and encouraging defiance can be helpful. Now, there are many other things that we want to do to change this too. One thing I don't love about this research is, to some degree, it puts the onus on the people who have faced challenges. There are many structural changes we should make. Many other people should be supporting the success of these groups, but to the extent that we want to rile people up and not let confidence hold them back, this is maybe one way, is educating people about those negative stereotypes, encouraging them constantly to defy them and not be defined by them.
Wow, what a beautiful, beautiful answer and perspective. Where I come from, we say it's not what they call you, it's what you answer to. And you've certainly answered the call for today, Dr. Katy. Thank you so much. You ready for 4 for 4?
Let's do it. Yeah, I have my notes.
Okay, well, I'm going to
I always come prepared.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Listen, I'm sure that's something that the Wharton School encourages. And if you see Dean Erica James, please tell her I said hello. I had the enjoyment of actually being on, I think it was a podcast, but it may have been just a meeting we were doing with her several years ago. So please give her
I will
my
pass that
best.
along. We are so lucky to have her as our leader. She's fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to ask you 4 questions to which you'll give me 4 answers. There are no right or wrong. And for the first question, I want you to share with me who is at your table. You invite 4 people from any time, past to present, preferably human people, people, but who's at your table and why?
Yeah, I love this question. It was so much fun to think about. So I have to start with my hometown hero of Benjamin Franklin. So I'm in Philadelphia right now at the University of Pennsylvania, which he founded. And I don't know how much your family knows about Benjamin Franklin, but this is one of the most creative people who has ever walked this earth, giving us everything from lightning rods to the Franklin stove, to bifocals, to our Constitution. Ben Franklin is quite extraordinary and influenced so many aspects of modern life. I think it would be tremendously interesting and fun to have dinner with Ben Franklin.
He's the first. This is the first time Ben Franklin's been invited to a table in all the years, and many people who we podcasted with, and it's blowing me away that it is the first time, as you say that, because when you think about it, for him to be such an inventor, beyond tinkerer, such an inventor, and to still be such a diplomat,
And a
you
philosopher,
know,
right? We have a
yeah,
pathway here
those don't
carved with his
usually come in
amazing
the same
sayings, right?
package.
Uh,
They
it,
don't come in the same package
the early
often, do
bird
they?
gets the worm, right? All the things that
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
many expressions that have stood the test of time because they have such truth in them. He was a great thinker, and also very practical. Helped us understand currents. I mean, just an extraordinary person. So he's my number one. I'll go from Ben Franklin to someone very different and say,
Okay, the almanac as well.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay.
Um,
Mhm.
Tina Fey would be at my table. Tina Fey makes me laugh. I think I laughed so hard I cried when I read her book Bossy Pants, and I love her sense of humor and the incredible entertainment she creates, and I love that she's a strong female leader. And P.S. also a Philadelphian, so there's a little bit of a hometown theme in my first two. But I would add her to the table. I, by the way, love to see her interact with Ben Franklin. That would be quite interesting. So Tina Fey is at my fantasy dinner table. I like diversity of opinion. I'm going to throw in J.K. Rowling because I have a young kid who's reading the Harry Potter books, and I love the Harry Potter books, and I love that I'm sticking with my creative theme of sort of creating and she's an amazing female entrepreneur, in addition to being a really creative writer who's given us an amazing work of children's literature. And I'll stick Leonardo da Vinci in last, just
Wow, wow.
because if I can have anyone from history, he's more in the Ben Franklin category of just extraordinary creativity, and I think it would be really great fun to meet Leonardo da Vinci. So those are my four.
Well, I'm inviting myself, so you get five. That's quite a
Yes,
table.
please. I hope you will join.
Okay, let's go two for four. What music are you listening to right now and why?
My musical tastes are not super sophisticated, I will admit. I go for the same pop music that a lot of other people do. So Taylor Swift is always on my playlist. Uh, I will tell you, and speaking of health and prevented, we've been talking about health. It's something I study. I went for my mammogram, and then I got to have a breast MRI this year. Very, very important things to do, preventative healthcare. And when they put you in there, I don't know if you've had this experience. They give you headphones because there's a lot of noise if you have an MRI, and you get to listen to music and choose. And I said, well, what's the most common choice? What's the most popular? I'm curious. And they said Taylor Swift. And so that made me feel validated. That's what other women were listening to of my age.
You can get through it.
Yeah, exactly. And it was very calming. I like Katy Perry. Partly, I have to admit, it's because she made it so that every time I go into a coffee shop and give my name, they write it sometimes correctly, or if I spell my name, people pronounce it, because I'm a Katie with a Y, just like Katy Perry. And she changed me from Caddy or Kathy in the public mind to, and I also like her music. And this isn't a throwback, but I always love Billy Joel. I really love Billy Joel.
Yeah, yeah,
Sing
yeah,
along
yeah,
with,
yeah,
brings
yeah.
my mood to another
Piano.
level. And then I'll throw in another one. I have a 9-year-old son, and he's very into AJR. So I hear a
Oh,
lot of AJR right now. He loves that band, and I love that their mom was their original manager, and that anyway they're brothers. It's adorable. So AJR will be my fourth.
I love your playlist. Thank you for sharing it with us.
My pleasure.
What are the four books you recommend to our family listening right now and why?
Well, here I'm going to go nerdy because I am a behavioral scientist, and I'm going to give you recommendations if you find the things we've talked about interesting and want to know more about this field, but in a way that is accessible and fun and written for a general audience. So I picked four books that I think are the most fabulous behavioral science books out there. The first is a book called Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. It's a book all about how every environment we're in, every room we walk into, every website we visit, every form we fill out is shaping our choices, whether we realize it or not. And it describes the various ways this happens, and it helps guide us to be better. They call it choice architects, to nudge people in positive directions, help them make choices that are welfare enhancing through our insights about how choice is made. It's a wonderful book, and a massive bestseller. Another book I really love is called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke, who's also a friend. And it's a book, she was a world champion poker player and also has a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in cognitive psychology. And she brings those two loves together and sort of introduces the idea of how we can make better decisions through thinking more like a poker player, and understanding that every choice you make is really a probabilistic bet, just like
She's an
every decision.
incredible person who I admire so much.
She's wonderful. Yeah, I'm a huge fan
Mhm.
of Annie Duke. She's absolutely terrific. Another one I'll recommend is Influence by Bob Cialdini. He's one of the great thinkers in my field, and he studied for years, tried to understand what it is that persuades us to change our mind by studying door-to-door salesmen, car salespeople, real estate agents, and understanding what are the tricks of the trade and which of them systematically really work. And it's really written from not as a guide to being more persuasive, but as a guide to better understanding how the world might be manipulating you so that you can take control and make the choices you want to make, but also so that you, if you want to exert good influence, can use these strategies to make the world a better place. It's a wonderful book full of great insights. And then my fourth is a book called Scarcity by Eldar Shafir and Sendel Mullainathan, two behavioral scientists, behavioral economists, thinking about how when we are constrained, when we have limited resources, whether it's time or money or really any other resource, education, how much that affects our choices in ways we may not understand, and how important it is to understand the changes in our decision processes when facing constraints, and be more empathetic with those facing constraints and try to reduce constraints whenever we can. So it's another really wonderful read.
Thank you so much for adding to our library. Thank you. The books that are recommended, we get. Um, Lastly, what are the four pieces of advice you would give to our family? And given where we are today, especially from your field of interest, but from your general person as well. And if it's advice that was shared with you by someone else, please pay homage to the author.
Yeah. Well, the first piece of advice very much aligns with where we started our conversation. Make it fun. Make it fun to do the things that you want to do. Find a path that you will enjoy. And that might mean choosing a career where achieving your goals will be fun. It might mean, though, just pursuing a goal in a different way so that you'll find it a little bit more enjoyable. There's a lot of ways that we can think about making things fun, but that should be an objective, and focus less on efficiency and more on enjoyment. And weirdly, that actually makes you more effective and efficient. And I think that's very counterintuitive, but a very important lesson. Um, Hone your strengths. And this one I will attribute. I was a very serious competitive tennis player as a young person and even in college. And if you read my book, which I know you have, there's a lot of tennis examples in there. And it's because this was a sport that was a big part of my life and a big part of my learning. And my tennis coach was the one who really taught me this lesson that then applies to so much else in life. So I remember very vividly when I was growing up and practicing, I had a really strong backhand. That was like my strength. So I, of course, thought I need to really work on my forehand, practice that weakness. And my coach told me, Katy, it's a mistake. Katy, you want to spend 70% of your time honing those strengths, leaning into those strengths, making them weapons, making them even sharper weapons. And sure, of course, you need to focus a little on your weaknesses too, but lean into your strengths. And it's something that has stayed with me, and I think doesn't apply to tennis, but to life. Finding the things where you are strong and leaning into them, not worrying as much. I mean, certainly, we want to patch our glaring problems, but also once you recognize what are your superpowers and how can you make them more superpowers, it's something that I think about with my students and mentoring constantly, and even thinking about, I run a research center here with a staff that where we try to adjust people's jobs to better suit their strengths, right? It's not always that I need to train this person up, as it might be, I recognize this is what they're excellent at. And so I'm going to give them more of that thing and have other people do the thing they're not as strong at. So leaning into strengths in all ways would be my second. Yeah. Another one I would say is recognize the power of coaching others. And we talked about this, but when we mentor and give to others, we grow ourselves. So it is not as selfless of an act as it might seem. And some people may not make time for it, in part because they think, oh, my life is so constrained. But actually, it is selfish. Mentoring others helps you grow. And it makes you happy, and it brings you social connection, and it supports another person's growth. And I think as a result, there should be a lot more time invested in mentoring and growing other people, because it's such a win-win. So I would add that. And then finally, I would say, think about meaning and purpose in the work you do wherever you can. One of the things that has given me the most joy over the last 15 years of my life has been in co-leading a research center called the Behavior Change for Good initiative here at Penn, along with my amazing collaborator, psychologist Angela Duckworth. And we built that research center to help accelerate the science of behavior change that could improve lives. And before we were doing that work, I had lots of other interesting research projects, but they weren't as mission driven. And becoming clearer about how the work I loved could also serve a greater good and save lives and accelerate educational opportunities has truly made my work so much more rewarding. So look for ways that you can create meaning and purpose in the work you do, whether it's in your home, outside of your home, with your family, with your friends, with your job. In all those places, that meaning and purpose can give great satisfaction and reap great rewards.
Wow. Just your 4 pieces of advice make for excellent listening.
That's kind
And
of
I'm
you say.
sure, oh no, I'm sure our team is going to want to excerpt it and share it. I think a lot of people who won't have the time to listen to everything right now are going to listen to that, and then they're going to come back and hear the rest. But wow, 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 Doctor. Oh, Dr. Katy, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really lovely to get to chat with you, and I appreciate your thoughtful questions.
Thank you. Thank you from my heart to your office. We're excited. Thanks.